You're live with BBC News. A new report suggests countries are far from reaching global climate targets, according to the United Nations Environmental Programme. A global warming limit of 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels was set in 2015 to ward off catastrophic effects of climate change. But the UN is now warning that world temperatures are on course to rise by 3.1 degrees this century, twice that target set a decade ago. The warning comes just weeks before world leaders gather in Azerbaijan for the International Climate Summit COP29. So how concerned should we be about this warning? I put the question to Michael Mann, Distinguished Professor at the University of Pennsylvania and author of Our Fragile Moment, How Lessons from Earth's Past Can Help Us Survive the Climate Crisis. Thanks so much for joining us on the BBC here. This report shows that these existing measures to curb the rise in global warming are falling really short of where they need to be. How seriously does this warning need to be taken?
Well, it's an important warning. Listeners might be left with the impression that there has been some substantial change in sort of the complexion of where we stand over the last year or so. And there isn't actually. What the report states is something that we've sort of known for a few years. If we have no further progress, if we only if our policies going forward are the policies that we have now, so we make no further progress in decarbonizing our economies, then we will probably see somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 degrees Celsius warming of the planet. Now, that actually reflects some progress since 2016. At the time of the Paris Agreement, we were headed towards somewhere between 4 and 5 degrees Celsius. Now, because we've made progress, not enough progress, but significant progress, far more investment in renewable energy. Carbon emissions, by the way, this year are likely to decline slightly. So it is not true that they're increasing. They're basically flat. This year, they're going to decline a little bit. And that's in large part because of real progress in moving towards renewable energy. But we're not doing it fast enough. And 3 degrees Celsius is too much warming. As you reported earlier, as the story reported earlier, if we warm the planet even beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius, we're going to start to see far worse consequences. Now, the obstacles are not physical and they're not technological. At this point, the obstacles to doing that, to achieving that, are still political. And so that's a really important message going into this next conference of the parties, where this might be our last opportunity to sort of ratchet up those commitments to the point where we do have a chance of keeping warming below that truly dangerous 1.5 degrees Celsius.
And the various agencies of the United Nations and the Secretary General himself, Antonio Guterres, has made pleas to countries time and time again for action, for progress, to commit to those goals. Again, the warning today and the plea for this to be led by the rich countries. Is that message falling slightly on deaf ears? Is there just not enough willpower there, or how do you see it?
Well, I hope it isn't. As you know, we're just less than 2 weeks now from a monumental election here in the United States, which, it might sound like it's hyperbole, but it's not. This election could determine the future course of global climate action, because the United States has to take leadership on this issue. We are the world's largest legacy polluter. And if we don't, make substantial commitments, it's difficult to see other countries like China, India coming to the table. And so it's critical that Americans elect a president and a party that's willing to actually try to build on the progress that we've made. And so the most important thing American listeners can do is vote in this election, make sure everybody they know votes in this election, that they vote on the climate. And today, that really means voting for one of the two parties, Kamala Harris for president and Democrats all the way down the line. Then we have a fighting chance. If Donald Trump is victorious and the GOP is victorious, it's very difficult to see a path forward this decade, during this critical decade where we really do have to reduce carbon emissions substantially.
And you mentioned the United States there. There are several big countries who are worse offenders than others, but how do you compel certain countries to do more and to bring in different policies for the sake of humanity, as you describe it there, for the sake of the planet?
Yeah, well, the UN process, the enforcement mechanism is what we call name and shame. It's really the only enforcement mechanism. So there isn't a lot of teeth in that, but I still think that means something today. To those countries that refuse to do their part, there are ways that the rest of the world can, use various economic incentives and disincentives to penalize those countries that are not doing their part. So there are things that we can all do to try to bring shame to those countries that refuse to make any meaningful commitment. And right now, unfortunately, we have a situation because of the way the agreement is set up, where one country, one petrostate like Saudi Arabia or Russia, those have been the two worst actors in recent years, can basically scuttle an agreement for the entire, for the entire world. One member country of the UN can essentially veto an agreement, and that makes it very difficult to get an agreement that has, a commitment to actionable, substantial reductions in carbon emissions, including a phase-out language to phase out fossil fuels. We still haven't been able to get that sort of language into these agreements because of bad actors like Saudi Arabia and Russia.
Well, we'll see what happens at the upcoming COP, as you say. Michael Mann there, professor at the University of Pennsylvania. Thanks so much for joining us on BBC News.